do tonight our third and final installment of The Age of the Earth, episode 3. Whether we finish it or not, I'm done. So what we've reviewed, just to kind of get just a real quick high-level overview of what we've talked about previously. Day, age, and gap theory, we reviewed what that was, just to kind of give you an idea that the understanding that this doesn't just come from atheists, this idea that the Earth is billions of years old. They're supposed to be Christians, God knows the heart, supposedly Christians, I'm calling them, that also believe this, that the Earth is billions of years old. And then we discussed what the Bible says about the age of the Earth, and fairly clear that it's in the neighborhood of 6,000 years, not billions of years. And then we talked about how the Bible can be accurate despite that, how many years it has been. We had 4,000 years of kind of iffy on written history in general, and but we talked about how they were able, there was, from how long they lived, just from that standpoint, there was a period of where about 2,500 years where there were 4 different people that could have talked to each other in that period of time. That's how old they lived. So then we discussed quite a bit about what science sees as evidence and interprets as old Earth, and why just an alternative to what the conclusions that they drew. But one question that needs to be answered is, why does the Earth need to be billions of years old? For this, let's take a look at Isaiah chapter 47 and verse 10. For thou hast trusted in thy wickedness. Thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. Historically, we see a lot of gods being made. But I think people kind of caught on to that, basically, and understood that these gods that their rulers were making were so that the ruler could control them, have control over them. But they still like the idea of not actually having a God in general, certainly not one that the God of the Bible. They would really rather just be their own God. And that's what this verse is talking about, and that's one of the reasons, essentially, that they need to have billions of years, because they have to do this. They have to have a life originating somehow without God. And the only way to do that is to just keep adding time to it. Started out 100 million years old back in the late 1800s, and it's now 4.5 billion years old, and they just keep adding. And it might be more than that today, I'm not sure. Literally, I'm not, it could very well easily be more than that by now. But that's kind of the mental reason why. Physically, why they need it is we've got to figure out how we got from, an amoeba basically to a man, and this is done with billions of years. And one of the ways that they make this determination is through similarities in DNA code. Phylogenetic tree. Anybody remember seeing that one in school? Phylogenetic tree is the one where it's this big tree, and you got chimpanzees and here, and apples over here, and all these different things, and how they're related, and they come up, they go to man, but we all kind of come down into this one narrow stump, basically, to a common ancestor is what they call it. Give you an idea of where we're at with that right now. Viral Nova, a science website, says, this is a quote from them, while today there might not be much relation between a human and a banana, there was at a time when we were all one in the same. However, thanks to millions of years of evolution, bananas and humans now only share 50% of the same DNA. Still, though, that's pretty freaky to think about. I agree with that comment. I'm not sure about the rest of it. GetScience.com says this on one of their studies, which I give you some of the details here, but this is a quote from them. Gene sequencing reveals that we have more in common with bananas, chickens, and fruit flies than you might expect. Then they go on to list it. Chimpanzee is 96% identical to human DNA. Chicken is 60% identical to human DNA. A banana is 60% identical, and actually more than 60% identical, and a fruit fly is 60% identical to human DNA. So really, we are closer related to a banana than we are a chicken, which very interesting. Little factoid there. Now, of course, there's some issues with this idea. They're using what's called the CATG sequencing, which is it's for CATG is their initials for the chemicals used in DNA. And I don't want to go crazy with all the specifics about it, but you know, if you understand binaries, ones and zeros, that's my stuff, computer things, and how many codes you can write, how many things you can write with binary. And this is essentially twice that because you have 4 different chemicals. So the possibilities of combinations are not endless, but they go a long ways. And so what they're doing with this in order to give you these percentages is they're lining those up in a particular order and then matching them with their sequencing. That's what it's called, gene sequencing.
You're saying that they're forcing them to come.
Kind of, you know, basically, it's just almost completely, it's almost random, but I mean, they are lining them up. They're sequencing them in a particular order, and then they're taking our DNA and sequencing it in that same order, and they're saying this is how much is identical. And I love the wording that's identical, 60% identical. It's like, okay. But the interesting, and then looking at it, and you say 96% for that chimpanzee, though, boy, that's kind of convincing, 96%. One thing you got to keep in mind, less than 1% difference between all of mankind is less than 1%. So a 4% difference is actually pretty significant. It's actually, that was these guys, they're actually down to 95%. By this point. And then the other thing is they're using less than 800,000 lines out of 3 billion, which you can understand. There's 3 billion lines. You got to stop somewhere. But what's significant, and it's actually a pretty good sample, really, with statistically speaking, that's a pretty good sample. But the thing with that is that every time they have added more lines, they've increased their percentage. They started at actually, chimpanzees were 98% identical. So they've gone down to actually, let's say it's 95. These guys, probably an older article, they're down to 95%. So as they increase lines, the percentage is increasing. So the sample rate being good and all as it is, it's still probably significantly larger than that. Going to end up probably 90%. If they ever finish mapping the whole thing. And again, it's fairly random. It's just about the idea of lining up similarities is how they're coming up with this. Oh, I had one other kind of an interesting detail about the DNA, speaking of the 3 billion lines. If the information in one person's DNA, if typed out, would fill enough books to fill the Grand Canyon 78 times. So that's kind of why they haven't completed this anyway. They got a long ways to go. I doubt that they're ever going to get there. And so anyways, and they use similarities in chromosomes too, but these were based on DNA sequencing, and it's just an article about, it's a fact, 96% identical to chimpanzees. Okay, well, they're missing one here because I found another one. Clouds are 100% water, and watermelons are 97% water. That's only a 3% difference. Jellyfish are 98% water, and snow cones are also 98% water. So, according to science, if you lick a jellyfish, it'll taste like a snow cone. I say somebody should try that for sure.
Let's let the scientists do it first.
All right. It should definitely be a science thing. Required course for sure. So, the point that they're trying to make that similar DNA, similar chromosomes, all these different things are proof of a common ancestor. Well, it could also be just as easily proof of a common designer. And if you look, again, I'm computer stuff. If you look at Microsoft products, hundreds of thousands of lines of code. I guarantee you 50% of that's going to be the same in Excel as it is in Word, as it is in everything else. Again, showing a common designer. If you look at cars, any brand of car, pick a Chevy truck, just Chevy truck models, all the differences that you can find on those, you're still going to find interchangeable parts, different things like that, and I suppose that's probably proof they all evolved from a chariot. But to me, that sounds like they had a common designer as well. And Fords, you can still put Model T car parts on most of them. They don't have much advancement in technology. I'm not real sure where I was going with this part, other than to say that species is a man-made grouping. Yeah, I'm not going to go there. We're going to move on to something else. Okay, so now let's go on to evidences of a young Earth. Since we've done evidences for the old Earth, we're going to get helped out with some slides. So this is evidences that we'll find in nature and many different things, really, of God. And I don't know how else. I would be interested to take a math class where they discuss Fibonacci and see how they can leave God out of this. But in any case, we're going to go through this just a little bit. What are Fibonacci numbers? I'm not going to go into all of this. You don't have to. We won't take a test at the end of this, and you have to know this formula. It's really actually very simple. It's 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5, and it just goes on and on and on, all the way through. Okay, what's the significance of it, though? But anyways, that's the series. Fibonacci series, Fibonacci numbers. It's seen everywhere in nature. This is the Fibonacci spiral. 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Those are all Fibonacci numbers. And they're found in seashells, anything pretty much with a spiral. The human ear has a Fibonacci spiral. The egg is a Fibonacci spiral. This is all 2, 3, it's all this series of numbers. And again, just keep in mind too, when I say Fibonacci series, this is God's series, not Fibonacci. He discovered it. Nobody invented math. Math was there, humans, we discovered it, that's all. And that's all that happened with Fibonacci. But since he was the one that discovered it, that's what it's called. Flowers, all of the petals. Buttercups and wild roses have 5, lilies and irises 3, cord marigolds 13, black-eyed Susans call them sunflowers here usually, 21 petals, those are all Fibonacci numbers. You find all the sequence in it. Same thing with the leaves, you see that one over there's got 3. You got, continue on, you're at 5, etc. They're all Fibonacci numbers. Fibonacci numbers, pineapples and bananas. There's 3 or 5 flat sides to a banana. We talked about them. That's our cousin banana. 3 or 5 sides. The pineapple, the spirals, depending on the width of it, where it's at, you know, where the widest part is, can have 5, 8, 13, 21 scales. You know these things on them. You know what a pineapple looks like. But all Fibonacci numbers, the whole series is. Pine cones, again, this one's going to depend on its size, 8 or 13 depending on the size, and that's these spirals here. He's going to have 8 or 13 of those every time. There's no, I mean, if you squish one, it's not going to, if you step on it, it won't, but I'm saying, in general. Donald Trump's head has a Fibonacci spiral. And then you have the golden section, which is, again, I'm not going to go into all this, a lot of ratio, a lot of stuff, represented by pi. Pi is actually part of the Fibonacci. Well, it's the section is what it is. It's not the scale, the numbers, but it's the section, just kind of like the spiral. There's a lot of Fibonacci. It's all sequential. It all mathematically relates. Golden section in the Fibonacci numbers, and it just shows first point closest is 0 and 1, second 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 5. These are all Fibonacci numbers, and that's pi. The golden proportion is based on the golden, is the basis of the golden triangle. It essentially is a golden triangle, whose sides are in golden proportion to each other. It's considered visually the most pleasing rectangle. And for that reason, it's used extensively in architecture, designing it structural, engineering, everything about that is essentially perfect, or as close as it can be. Okay, so we are gonna do a test. There is a test, see, a little pop quiz really is what it is. We're gonna have 2 slides, okay? And you're gonna look at them, it's gonna be a series of, I think, 4 pictures, A, B, C, D, and then E, F, G, H, or something like that. Okay, so we're gonna look at them quickly. You're gonna pick out the one you think is the best looking triangle out of both of those. So you're gonna end up with 2 triangles, 2 letters when you're done, okay? All right. All right, what did you get? C and G? C and D? C and D? Yeah, it's C and D, that's of course the correct answer. C and D were probably the rectangles you chose. Okay, so now go back to the 2. See, there's C. Next one. D. They're perfect. They're the Fibonacci. They're the golden proportion. And the ratio to those was 1 to 6. So one times the 6th, or the 6th was 6 times the length of the one side, which is the golden ratio. That's big enough. They can be found in about everything because of the aesthetics, the pleasingness, again, the structure, everything. Playing cards, windows, book covers, file cards, ancient buildings, modern skyscrapers. Artists use them for all kinds of sculptures or painting, different things, pretty much everywhere. Examples of that. The Parthenon in Greece here. See over here, sorry, probably better. The Great Pyramid. The rest of the pyramids I don't believe match up. I think it's just the Great Pyramid, which is an interesting study. is the Great Pyramid in our Bible? Something interesting to look into.
That next time?
That may be. Again, we got our old buildings over here, the Notre Dame in Paris, and then a couple of newer structures, but they are the golden ratio. And then music. Structurally, this is a violin, and we got Stradivari and Baginski used the golden ratio to create their violins. And then in the music, in the composition, Mozart used it, divided sonatas according to the golden section, exposition consisted of 38 measures, development and repetition consisted of 62 measures. We're just keep going through the Fibonacci scale through everything. Beethoven used the golden section in his Fifth Symphony. Opening of the piece appears in the golden section. Points 618 pi also appears at the repitulation, which is pi of the way through the piece. Count the number of keys, or the notes, in each of the brackets. You'll see 2, 3, 5, 8, and 13 Fibonacci numbers.
Did you know that?
On the next pages, you'll see the golden ratio proportion. So this is, again, using the ratio, golden ratio, but this dentist, Eddie Levin, did it for dentistry to start with. That's what it's used for, this device, this, what do they call it, gauge. They have a gauge. He developed a gauge to use it for dentistry. That's a picture of what it looks like. Well, they don't put it in your mouth. Things like that, okay? So you get your ratio. So your chin, mouth to the nose is a golden ratio, the distance between eyes and across the bridge. You'll find it in architecture, automotive industry, music, and musical reproduction, fashion, handwriting, and general design. The Baghdad City Gate, this is the gauge, harder to see in here, but St. Paul, London. Great Wall. Windsor Castle, Mercedes. It didn't work on the Ford. I tried to did it. I just kept putting a CD. Multiple places. Again, a musical instrument, bass, fashion. It's used for that. Then in nature, we'll see it, animals and plants. You can see that if I'm in the way, a bird and ant. Two different ratios in that. Peacock feather. Sunflower. A picture of a flower. And leaves on the stem. So anyways, that is where you see God in nature. And then you can equate that to a young earth because we've already verified that his word says that it's a young earth. Luke, let's look at Luke chapter 19. Verse 40. And he answered and said unto them, I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out. And then Romans chapter 1. verses 19 and 20. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And they are without excuse. The universal character of this revelation and the clarity of it leave man without excuse for rejecting it. Linsky says, men cannot charge God with hiding himself from them and thus excuse their irreligion and their immorality. The problem isn't that they don't know God, but they know God and they refuse him. Spurgeon quote, will you kindly notice that according to my text, knowledge is of no use if it does not lead to a holy practice. They knew God. It was no good to them to know God, for they glorified him not as God. So my theological friend over there, who knows so much that he can split hairs over doctrines, does not matter what you think or what you know, unless it leads you to glorify God and to be thankful. Continuing just a little bit there in Romans chapter 1, verses 22 through 25. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, into birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changing the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So they're worshiping the creation. We see that too. Continuing on with the theme of where do we see the young earth in creation, in what we see, in the evidence of what we see. Very little sediment on the sea floor, actually. You can probably verify that, right, Sean? Very little sediment on the sea floor. That indicates thousands of years, not billions. Bent rock layers. Rock layers, thousands of feet thick, have been bent and folded without fracturing. That indicates that they were all laid down at once as opposed to separately over millions of years. That's one of their big ones. We actually, in one of the previous sessions that we were talking about this, that they use sediment layers, rock layers to determine the age of the earth, and wrongly so. And they've got no reason for that either. Soft tissue and fossils, I don't know if you've heard of these, but 65 million years ago, supposedly, we're talking about, and we have bones with marrow in them, with blood vessels, even in some cases skin tissue still on them. I don't care what state they were in, and some of them were frozen, but it wouldn't have been frozen for 65 million years. So there would have been differences and changes in climate and so forth over that period. Pretty hard to explain that one. Also, there's very little salt in the sea. Didn't taste like it when I accidentally gulped some down, but there actually is very little compared to what it should have for billions of years, because that all washes down from the land and into the ocean, the salt does. And so after that many millions of years, well, in this case billions really, you should be seeing a lot more salt in the oceans. A rapidly decaying magnetic layer. The Earth is surrounded by a magnetic field that protects living things from solar radiation, and without it, life could not exist. Carbon-14 in fossils. I think we went over that a little bit when we discussed their process with it. So carbon-14 or radiocarbon is a radioactive form of carbon that scientists use to date fossils. I'm sure you've all heard of that. Radiocarbon dating or carbon dating. That's proven science. It's a guarantee. It's no doubt they could take anything and tell you how many billions of years old it is, they say, with everything, and you just can't even argue it. They'll shut you down if you try and say it's anything less than what they say it is. But it decays so quickly with a half-life of only 5,730 years that none is expected to remain in a fossil after just simply a few 100,000 years. You wouldn't have anything to detect. Yet carbon-14 has been detected in ancient fossils, supposedly up to hundreds of millions of years old. DNA has been found in ancient bacteria, which could be expected, I suppose. The problem that presents is that DNA is pretty close to identical to the DNA found in the bacteria today. And you're talking about way too many mutations in that period of time, according to how evolution is supposed to work. There's no way that it could still be that close. In 2000, scientists claimed to have resurrected bacteria named Lazarus bacteria, discovered in a salt crystal conventionally dated at 250 million years old. They were shocked that the bacteria DNA was very similar to modern bacteria. If the modern bacteria were the result of 250 million years of evolution, its DNA would have been very different from Lazarus, based on known mutation rates. Then the last example, let me get enough, will be 70 sextillion visible stars in the sky. In 13.7 billion years since the Big Bang, there should be almost 10 million stars forming every minute. And it's never been seen. No one has ever watched the formation of a star. We've watched supernovas, the destruction of a star, but no one has ever seen one made. And at the rate that we're talking about, you should see 10 million every minute. So a little bit of a discrepancy there as well. So they never change their story. They just go around the parts that fail. Basically, they're saying, we know what happened, we're just not sure how this part happened yet, and we'll get to that. They can't change it, and that's why they keep adding billions, or millions of years to billions of years, is because in order to maintain this idea that you're your own God, they have to keep doing something to add to it. I actually had my very first prediction, and I'll say it now because we're on YouTube. And this is my prediction. I say that within 50 years, aliens will be scientific fact, just like evolution is. The reason I say that is because they're talking about that already. They can't help but talk about it because it's the biggest flaw in their entire theory is, how did life get started? How is life generated, or whatever they want to call it? Where did life come from? Well, they can't explain it. The primordial soup thing only gets you so far. You're missing an ingredient there. And so I believe that, and they've said it, they could in fact, I thought I had that in my notes. Apparently not. Could aliens have seeded the planet? And so that's my prediction. They're going to determine that. Now, again, then they don't have to prove that, obviously, because, well, actually, that's not it'll be proof because they have evidence of. That's what they're saying now about evolution in general. It's fact because they have all this evidence that points to it. So it's fact now. So aliens will become fact just based on evidence that supposedly they have. And then it still gives you another question, where did the aliens come from, right? But it'll buy them another 100 years or whatever, so it won't matter. My prediction, I said it here first. Oh, I did put something in here. Oh yeah, this was some of the quotes. The Atlantic, these are some serious journals. Was there a civilization on Earth before humans? That's a quote. How stuff works, a quote. Did alien seeds cause life to explode on Earth? National Geographic, National Pornographic, I call it usually. 7 alien Earths may be swapping life via meteorites. It's National Geographic. So it's not very long. It'd probably be less time than that, but within the next 50 years for sure. Time is their God. It is a religion. We've talked about that throughout several of these sessions as well. Time is their God. If a princess kisses a frog and the frog turns into a princess, it's called a fairy tale, right? But if after billions of years a frog turns into a prince, that's science. We went from tens of millions in Darwin's times to billions now. That's what it takes to get to that point. I won't go to these, but Isaiah 15:20, they'll call evil good, good evil. We know that. 2 Timothy 3:13, deceiving and being deceived. Matthew 18:6, offending the little ones, and let's look at that one real quick, please. Matthew chapter 18. Verse 6. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. That's what we're talking about here mostly. I think we're all by now able to discern these things, but they're teaching this to our children, and we need to pray about that. Tom, would you close us with a word of prayer, please?